Namaste, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening from. Welcome to the very first deep dive on this channel, Keto Context.
This is a new space, a new channel, and we're new hosts. So thank you for giving us your time and trust as we begin this journey.
We started Keto Context because, well, we felt there's a real gap today. If you look at the media landscape, everything is designed for speed.
Exactly. For heat, not light.
Yes. A lot of conversations online are loud, rushed, and, they're designed to provoke immediate reactions rather than foster genuine understanding. This channel was created out of a simple need for calm, thoughtful, and meaningful conversations in a time where most discussions are just. They're rushed, polarized, and shallow.
We want to slow things down. We don't just want to give you the headline. We want to give you the blueprint of the system that created that headline. We're here to talk through important topics: politics, economics, global power, society, with context, nuance, and clarity.
And we're not here to tell you what to think.
Not at all. We're here to think with you.
Today, for our debut deep dive, we are plunging into one of the most complex and, frankly, most misunderstood global stories of our time: Venezuela. We have a nation that sits upon the world's largest proven oil reserves, yet simultaneously has suffered one of the most severe and, enduring economic collapses in recent history.
Our mission today is comprehensive. This is not a debate over political figures or a simple headline reaction to the events of January 3rd. It is a slow, analytical look at the decades of systemic erosion, the shock of the recent political upheaval, and the intense geopolitical struggle over that vast oil wealth.
And connecting those high-level statistics to the profound human costs behind them.
That's the key. Let's begin.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with what I think is a fascinating contradiction: the paradox of expectation. For, 20 years, the world has been watching Venezuela and saying, it's going to break, it's going to break.
Oh, at least since the early 2000s, really.
Right. Yet when the actual dramatic event, the reported capture of Nicolas Maduro on January 3rd happened, it still felt like this global punch to the gut. Why were we all so shocked by something we had been anticipating for so long?
I think it's because we failed to properly distinguish between an explosion and erosion. That distinction is everything here.
Okay, explain that. What's the difference?
Well, an explosion is sudden, it's visible, it's often violent. A war breaks out, a massive earthquake hits, a coup happens overnight. These events are, they're unambiguous, they dominate headlines, and crucially, they trigger an immediate global response.
The world can't look away.
The world can't look away. The UN mobilizes, aid organizations flood the area, sanctions, if they're applicable, are swift and clearly defined. But Venezuela was an erosion. Its decay was insidious. The system was hollowed out over a very, very long period. It was slow enough for the rest of the world to just get used to the suffering.
So it's like boiling a frog. The temperature rises so gradually that no one notices until it's too late. It becomes a kind of background noise.
A chronic condition, not an acute crisis. And because of that, you get this institutional fatigue.
Yeah.
The world just can't maintain focus. And that is precisely why the data, when you finally stop and look at it all together, is so unprecedented and shocking.
It's staggering. Let's get into the core of that data. The headline figure that just floors me is the 75% contraction of the GDP between 2013 and 2021. 75%. Can you walk us through the anatomy of losing 3/4 of a nation's economic value?
It's genuinely hard to wrap your head around. So to put that number in perspective for you, this is widely cited as the largest economic collapse for a country not at war in modern history.
Not at war. That's the key phrase.
That's the key.
Yeah.
So think about what this means in practical terms.
Yeah.
GDP is the value of everything a country produces and sells, goods and services. When 75% of that just vanishes, it doesn't just mean a few companies close down.
Yeah.
It means the entire manufacturing sector essentially collapsed. Agricultural output became negligible. The ability to maintain basic public works, we're talking sanitation, electricity, transportation, it just disintegrated.
So the economic foundations of the state didn't just crack, they vaporized.
Vaporize is the perfect word. It means the government lost its tax base. It lost its ability to earn foreign currency through exports. And therefore, it lost its ability to import anything necessary for survival.
Right.
By grabbing food, medical supplies, even the spare parts for its own oil infrastructure.
A complete death spiral.
A total death spiral. And this massive contraction was really driven by a catastrophic reliance on a single product, oil, combined with systemic corruption and just gross mismanagement under the Maduro regime after Chavez died.
So when global oil prices fell,
The entire central revenue stream for the country evaporated. Venezuela had no economic diversification. None.
Yeah.
And that led directly into the next devastating metric, hyperinflation.
we normalized hearing this number. 1.3 million % hyperinflation in 2018. The number is so abstract it almost loses all meaning. How does that kind of financial chaos actually show up on a street level for a normal person?
Yeah, that number is almost meaningless as a number. What it means on the ground is the total destruction of the concept of money. Money stopped working.
What do you mean it stopped working?
Well, money has three main jobs, right? It's a store of value so you can save it. It's a unit of account so you can price things. And it's a medium of exchange so you can buy things. Hyperinflation destroyed all three. That 1.3 million % meant a worker's monthly wage might lose half its purchasing power in a single afternoon.
So you get paid in the morning and by evening it's worth half as much.
If you're lucky, people couldn't save. Businesses couldn't plan. And the government couldn't issue bonds or long-term contracts because there was zero trust in the future value of the bolivar. People just abandoned the financial system entirely. They started bartering or using US dollars if they could get them. That collapse of trust, that drove the refugee crisis.
Which brings us to the sheer scale of the human exodus. We're tracking 7.7 million people who have fled the country.
A displacement crisis on the scale of Syria or Ukraine.
Exactly. A crisis caused by war, but here it's caused by economic erosion. And all of this was that slow burn. But then on January 3rd, we hit the brick wall.
Yes. The slow collapse collided with immediate, sharp geopolitical drama. The event was, of course, the capture of Nicolas Maduro, which has been widely referred to in the media as Operation Absolute Resolve.
Let's define that because the name itself is so dramatic. What exactly was Operation Absolute Resolve reported to be?
From what sources and media investigations have pieced together, Operation Absolute Resolve was the internal name for a very sensitive political and paramilitary action. It was reportedly planned by U.S. intelligence, contracted by certain opposition elements inside Venezuela, and then executed by a small, select group of internal and external actors. The goal was simple: the physical capture of Maduro. It was designed to be a swift decapitation of the regime to install an interim governing council. And that move immediately shifted the whole nature of the crisis from slow economic decline to immediate political and military intervention.
And now we step into the really contentious arena of the geopolitical question. The reports indicate a U.S. plan to oversee the country for an interim period, managing the political transition and, critically, securing the oil assets.
And that's where the perception becomes so important.
For many observers, especially in Latin America and the global south, this whole reported plan, it looks like a direct intervention.
Well, you have to look at the structure. A powerful external force orchestrates the removal of a leader and then proposes to oversee the country's governance and its most valuable assets. To many, that looks, smells, and sounds exactly like 19th century colonialism.
I have to challenge that just a little bit to play devil's advocate. If the argument from the U.S. or international actors is that they're intervening to stabilize the system to prevent a greater humanitarian disaster and maybe restore democratic institutions, is the label colonialism fair? Or is it just political rhetoric from opponents?
And that is the absolute heart of the analytical challenge. To be impartial here, we have to report on both the intent and the perception. The stated intent might be noble, restore stability, get energy supplies flowing again, which helps the global economy. But the perception, particularly given the long, long history of U.S. involvement in Latin American politics.
The history matters.
The history matters immensely. The perception is that this is simply seizing an asset. And the proof is in the market reaction. The immediate market implications show that the moment there was political turmoil driven by external actors, the global energy markets got very, very nervous.
The numbers on that were wild. Oil prices for heavy sour crude, which is Venezuela's specific product, they dropped double digits the day after the capture.
And that drop was a direct response to legal risk, not supply fluctuations. This is so important to understand. Venezuela's production is tiny right now. But the uncertainty over ownership is massive.
Ownership of the future supply.
Exactly. Think about it from a trader's perspective. If the Maduro regime had signed a big long-term contract selling future barrels of oil to a state-owned company in China, and then a new U.S.-backed government comes in and says that contract is void, who legally owns those future barrels?
It's a legal nightmare.
It's $1 trillion legal nightmare. And that ambiguity surrounding control of a full 17% of the world's proven reserves is enough to scare off any major trading house or refiner. That's what caused the massive immediate price collapse for that specific type of oil. The geopolitical solution has to solve the legal problem before any economic recovery can even begin.
Okay, we have spent a lot of time on GDP contractions and oil contracts, but those are just cold, abstract numbers. We need to transition now and connect the dots. What does a 75% economic contraction and 1.3 million% hyperinflation actually do to a person's ability to just survive?
That connection is absolutely essential to understanding this story. We have to move beyond the financial reports and look at the profound human consequences of this kind of institutional failure.
I want to start with a metric that I can't get out of my head. It was cited in reports from organizations like Mercy Corps, and they stated that newborns in Syria, a country in a literal decade-long active, grinding war zone, have a better chance of survival than newborns in Venezuela today. When you read that, what does it tell you about the state of Venezuelan society?
It's the starkest possible indictment of systemic collapse. I mean, war is brutal, it's horrible, it creates immense destruction. But sometimes, in a war zone, external aid can temporarily fill the gaps in medical care or food supply.
Right, there are aid corridors, there are NGOs on the ground.
There's an infrastructure for disaster relief. But in the Venezuelan crisis, the economic erosion systematically destroyed the capacity for both self-care and state care simultaneously. The infrastructure is gone, the personnel are gone, and the means to import necessary supplies are gone. It is a total dissolution of the state's ability to protect its most vulnerable citizens.
And that dissolution is directly tied to the brain drain. We talk about 7.7 million refugees, but it's important to remember who those people are. They aren't just bodies moving across a border. They are the essential component parts of a functioning society.
They are the professionals, the doctors, the engineers, the teachers. And the medical brain drain is particularly devastating. We have precise data on its impact. We know, for instance, that at least 13,000 highly trained doctors have fled Venezuela since 2015.
Wow, 13,000 doctors. That's a massive, critical portion of a nation's entire medical staff. So if you're a resident in Caracas, or even worse, a remote area today, what is the consequence of that exodus? What does that feel like on the ground?
It feels like you're living in the 19th century in terms of medical access, functionally. The consequence of that brain drain, combined with the economic collapse, is an estimated 85% shortage of basic medicines and medical supplies.
85%.
Yes. And when doctors leave, they take specialized knowledge with them. Surgeons, pediatricians, infectious disease experts. But even the staff that remains can do very little because they don't have the physical tools. They don't have the medicine.
Let's use the most basic illustration of the problem, one we touched on earlier. The inability to get something simple, like aspirin for a fever. How does that spiral into what you've called the total death of the future for a family?
It's a chain reaction. It's not simply that the family can't afford the aspirin. It's that the aspirin doesn't exist in the supply chain at any price. Hyperinflation broke the country's ability to import and distribute any basic necessities. Antibiotics, pain relievers, insulin, even specialized infant formula.
So it's not on the shelf.
It's not on the shelf. The shelf is empty. So if a child gets a common, totally treatable bacterial infection and there is no antibiotic available in the entire region, that is a death sentence. When the most routine acts of parenting, like treating a fever or a mild infection, become life or death crises, the social fabric has dissolved, and the future generation is literally being extinguished.
And that terrifying reality is why the migration hasn't stopped. Even after years of this massive exodus, the risk of leaving is high, but the risk of staying is existentially higher. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the UNHCR, reports that 2,000 people are still fleeing every single day.
Every day.
Yeah.
That is the daily churn of desperation and the paths they are choosing. That highlights the extremity of their circumstances. The vast majority of these people are walking south, attempting to cross what's known as the Darien Gap.
We hear the name Darien Gap a lot, but for listeners who don't know the geography, can you paint a picture of what that journey actually involves?
It is, without exaggeration, one of the most dangerous migration routes on Earth. The Darien Gap is this massive roadless jungle that sits between Colombia and Panama. It's a dense, lawless, topographical barrier.
So there are no roads, no police?
Nothing. Migrants face everything from venomous snakes and torrential rivers to criminal cartels. Organized crime groups control the routes, and they prey on the migrants through extortion, robbery, and horrific violence. It is, by all accounts, a graveyard. People who are walking that path are doing it because every single alternative they have experienced in Venezuela is considered worse.
And the scale of this desperation is accelerating, especially among the most vulnerable people. The UNHCR shared an alarming figure, a 40% increase in children crossing the Darien Gap just this year.
40%.
Okay.
And we have to be really clear about who this population is. We're not just talking about single young men seeking better wages. We're talking about mothers taking their toddlers and often unaccompanied children into one of the most hostile, lawless environments on the entire planet.
A mother making that choice.
That decision to risk your child's life against cartels and the elements is not driven by a political calculation. It's not driven by a desire for improved economic opportunity in the traditional sense.
The motivation is purely existential.
Absolutely. The decision is driven by the clear, rational belief that staying is a death sentence. That loss of institutional safety, that systemic failure of the state to protect life, that is what pushes a mother to expose her child to the horrors of the Darien Gap. Understanding this fundamental motivation is crucial. The true cost of that 75% GDP contraction is paid in the lives lost in that jungle.
That shift from politics to survival, it makes the global obsession with Venezuela's land feel almost predatory. Let's follow the money and the power now. If the human cost is so high and the country is currently producing less than 1% of the world's oil, why are powers like the US, China, and India so intensely interested in this specific crisis? Is it just about the massive reserves?
It's the potential of the reserves, and also the very nature of the asset itself. Venezuela possesses 303 billion barrels of oil. Let me just say that again. 303 billion barrels. That represents an astonishing 17% of the entire world's proven reserves.
That is it's an almost unimaginable amount of wealth buried right under the surface.
On paper, it makes them one of the richest nations on Earth, which is the ultimate contradiction when you contrast it with the collapse we just detailed.
It is the heart of the crisis.
Exactly. Despite having this vast wealth, Venezuela currently produces less than 1% of the world's output. The analogy we discussed before, I think, is perfect. It's like Venezuela has a Ferrari in the garage, a pristine high-performance machine, but for years, they've been selling the engine for scrap metal.
Okay, so why did the capacity drop so sharply? The oil is still there in the ground.
It's a systemic failure of expertise and maintenance. It's not just any oil. Venezuelan oil is primarily heavy sour crude. It's thick, it's sulfurous, and it requires really specialized technology and immense capital investment to extract and refine.
It's not easy to get out.
It's very difficult. And Chavez, and later Maduro, they nationalized the state oil company, PDVSA, and systematically pushed out all the foreign expertise, the American, European, and specialized contractors who held the technical keys to maintaining the deepwater rigs and the refinery upgrades.
So the people who knew how to run the machine were forced out.
They were forced out. And when the technical experts left and corruption siphoned away the maintenance budget, the pumps just stopped working. Wells became clogged, pipelines corroded. The engine was essentially left to rust in the garage.
So the global interest isn't in what little oil they're producing now, but what they could produce if that engine was restored. But restoring an engine of that size, one that covers 17% of the world's reserves, that's not cheap or fast.
Far from it. And that leads us directly to the cost of recovery, which is the great barrier to entry. To restore that engine and get production back up to a viable level, let's say 2 million barrels a day, which is still well below their historical peak, it requires an estimated $100 billion.
$100 billion.
And that's not a one-year investment. It requires a 10-year commitment of stability, technical expertise, and continuous capital flow.
So where does that $100 billion go exactly? What is that money buying?
It's buying decades of neglected infrastructure.
Yeah.
That $100 billion is needed to overhaul aging refineries. It's for purchasing new, specialized deepwater drilling equipment. And critically, it's for repairing the pipelines, the pumps, and the logistics chains that have essentially been stripped for parts or just left to decay.
And you have to pay the people to come back and do the work.
You have to pay for the technical teams, the engineers and geologists who have to be persuaded to return to what is still a very high-risk environment.
And that leads us to what you called the trillion-dollar question that drives all the geopolitics here. Who will fund, and maybe more importantly, who will guarantee this investment? Because whoever puts up that $100 billion effectively gets the keys to Venezuela's economic future for the next decade or more.
And this is where the geopolitical jigsaw puzzle comes into sharp relief. We have competing and often conflicting interests from three major global players. Let's start with the U.S. position, following the events of January 3rd.
Okay, so the U.S. is reportedly overseeing the interim government, Logically, they would want U.S. firms like Exxon or Chevron to go in and restart production. What guarantees do those firms need to commit $100 billion?
They need absolute ironclad legal security. We have to remember that under Chavez, there was a series of massive nationalizations where U.S. and European firms were essentially kicked out and their assets were seized without fair compensation.
They won't let that happen again.
Never again.
Yeah.
American firms will only re-enter Venezuela if they receive guarantees that any refinery they repair, any new drilling operation they fund, any capital they spend will not be seized again by a future potentially hostile government. This requires not just political stability, but the restoration of the rule of law and international contract sanctity, which Venezuela has lacked for decades.
So the political intervention of January 3rd, the effort to install a friendly interim government, it looks like a prerequisite for stabilizing the legal and financial environment for American capital.
Precisely. The political move is the commercial enabler. But that strategy runs directly into the interests of another key player, China.
China is owed a staggering $60 billion in loans given directly to the Maduro regime.
$60 billion. That is massive economic leverage.
So what does China want here?
China is driven by financial necessity, not ideology in this scenario. They are intent on recovering that money. They've already received some repayment in the form of oil barrels, but the production collapse complicated all of that. So China will demand that the new interim government, whoever's in charge, honors that debt load.
And they can back up that demand.
Oh, they have significant diplomatic and economic tools. They could potentially demand collateral-like control over certain key mines or infrastructure projects to guarantee repayment. And that would seriously complicate the U.S. attempt to grant American firms clear and exclusive access.
Okay, so the U.S. wants security for future investment. Just China wants repayment for past loans. Where does India fit into this dynamic?
Their current oil imports from Venezuela are basically zero.
India is playing a classic intelligent long game, and it's based on superior infrastructure. While they are currently importing virtually no Venezuelan oil because of sanctions and instability, they have specialized refineries that were built explicitly for this moment. They often cite the massive Jamnagar facility.
Why is a specialized refinery so important for Venezuelan oil?
Because Venezuelan oil, that heavy sour crude we talked about, is chemically difficult to process. It contains high levels of sulfur, and it's very thick. It requires advanced, expensive technologies like cookers to efficiently refine it into useful products like gasoline or diesel. Most refineries in the world are geared towards lighter, sweeter crude.
So India saw this coming and built the specific tool needed for the job.
Years ago, they invested in the specific technology needed for heavy, sour crude. They prepared for this day even while global sanctions were in place. They are perfectly positioned.
India is ready to absorb millions of barrels quickly and efficiently without having to retrofit their facilities or build new capacity. They are just waiting patiently for the political risk, meaning the U.S.-China debt fight and the contract guarantees to be sorted out. Once that path is legally and politically clear, India is positioned to become Venezuela's largest and most reliable customer almost overnight.
That's incredible foresight.
And that strategic positioning means they exert this quiet but very significant influence over any reconstruction plan.
The synthesis here is just stunning. We have a giant, global, high-stakes jigsaw puzzle, and the pieces are made of oil, U.S. legal guarantees, Chinese debt leverage, and Indian refining capacity.
And the board in which this entire multi-trillion-dollar game is being played is the lives of 28 million Venezuelan people who are simply trying to survive the week. It shows how the fate of an entire nation can be reduced to a variable in a larger global energy equation.
As we close this deep dive on keto context, I'm left with this haunting realization that Venezuela isn't just a country dealing with its own crisis. It truly functions as a mirror, reflecting universal and often very uncomfortable truths about power and governance.
It is a profound reflection. First, the situation shows us that rules really only apply to the people who can't break them. We've seen major global powers argue fiercely over who controls the assets and who is owed money, and this demonstrates a massive failure of international accountability while the population itself faces existential collapse.
The economic collapse allowed for the ultimate intervention.
The political manipulation of sovereignty, yes, and it reflects the absolute truth that abundant resources do not guarantee prosperity or even survival.
That's the scariest part.
I think so. Venezuela demonstrates that a country can be the richest in the world on paper, possessing 17% of the world's proven oil, and simultaneously be the poorest in reality if its institutions fail. If its governance is shattered by corruption, and if the basic rule of law just evaporates, wealth, When it's grossly mismanaged, ceases to be an asset and becomes a curse. It invites both internal decay and foreign interference.
It's a terrifying lesson for all of us. Stability is an incredibly fragile thing, a human creation.
It is. It takes generations to painstakingly construct functioning institutions. An independent medical system, a reliable legal system, a trustworthy banking system, and it takes just a few years of unchecked corruption and neglect to obliterate them entirely. And the path back. It's not a quick change of leadership. It requires $100 billion and a 10-year commitment.
As we launch this channel, focusing on context and depth, we want to hear your perspective on this complex story. We've talked about the systems, the oil, the collapse, but what about the next steps?
Yeah, if you are watching this crisis unfold, whether you're a direct observer or someone just analyzing the geopolitical shift from afar, what does this moment feel like to you? Is Operation Absolute Resolve the painful, high-risk beginning of a long, necessary reconstruction? Or is it just a transition from one form of domestic instability to another form of, say, externally enforced dependency? That is the question we urge you to carry with you.
Let's start a conversation built on that thoughtful reflection rather than just immediate reaction. And please, if you found this deep dive valuable, do subscribe to Keto Context. We're going to continue taking the biggest stories and finding the deep context that the headlines often miss.
Thank you so much for giving us your time, your trust, and your love today. We are really looking forward to your love and support.
Goodbye till our next deep dive. Namaste.